and welcome back to True Faith, the Writer's Block. It's episode 6. I'm Daniel. I'm your host once again. And once again, I'm joined by Chris, Lee and Craig, who we met in episode 3, I believe it was. Lads, how are we all tonight?
Very good.
Not bad, thank you.
Very good to hear. Just a quick reminder, as always, that if you want to be part of True Faith and get involved with what we do, head to @TFNUFC on Twitter and get in touch. Tonight, we're going to be kicking things off by discussing the next generation of Newcastle fans. The way things are going, there might not be a next generation of Newcastle fans. It's a real possibility with the on-field performances and the sort of rotting core of the club. Will season tickets be sold next season? Who knows? Lee, I know you have a young son who's come through the ranks of Newcastle. He supports the club very much, just like yourself. So, do you still have worries?
Massive worries, to be perfectly honest with you. Back when I went to my first game in 1983, I was 11, and I remember going to the match, and I went to the match full of hope. That Newcastle in the second division at the time, and as much as we weren't fantastic, I always thought there might be a chance one day that we might actually challenge, we might actually lift a pot or something like that, because I think it was fair to say that despite the fact that we had dubious owners back in the day, they always wanted the club to be the best it possibly could be. And if they thought they could have a crack at something, they would have a crack at something. The kids of 2021, I think, of around about 11, 12, 13 years old, have become disenfranchised with Newcastle United because, let's be honest, you talked about a rotting core of a club. What is there to support these days at St James's Park? There's nothing for the kids to sort of invest in. I call them the FIFA generation or the success generation. The blanket coverage of the top 6, if you like, if copyright Sky Sports, obviously, in the media. It's very, very easy for kids these days to sort of lean towards a Liverpool or a Manchester United or a Manchester City or a Tottenham. And one thing I think you see in Newcastle these days, you see a lot more shirts of clubs that aren't Newcastle. Back when I was 10, 11, 12 years old, you never saw a shirt in Newcastle that wasn't black and white stripes. So yeah, there's a massive worry. My son's a season ticket holder. He went through that phase from the ages of around about 13 to 15, where he just wasn't interested. He had the conversation with me. He said, "Dad, what's the point? We're not going to do anything. The club's not trying." Luckily, I managed to sort of bribe him with a season ticket. With he got to choose his seats, and all of a sudden he's obsessed again now. But it's really difficult. It is really difficult to keep them invested in the club and interested in the club.
I mean, I'm quite young. I've had a season ticket for about 10 years. I am quite young.
Just rub it in there.
Yeah, but as I say, I've had a season ticket for about 10 years now, and I have to say that nothing's ever sort of swayed me from Newcastle, which I'm quite sort of proud of, to be honest, because it hasn't been exactly brilliant times to support the club. Craig, what do you make of this? Do you think that we'll still continue to sell a lot of season tickets in years to come if little changes?
Yeah, so I wrote an article about this in True Faith over the weekend that was on the website, which is, partially why we're discussing it tonight. And, it was really driven out of, obviously, we're going through, in unprecedented times at the moment. COVID, fans haven't been in grounds. I think it's a year coming up. I think it was last weekend a year. So there's obviously that tendency to think people will want to come rushing back, but I'm actually thinking it could be potentially the opposite. Lee's touched on some of the reasons why that might be. And you think about the team, underperforming, potentially getting relegated. Obviously, we hope not, but there's probably a 50-50 chance of that happening. The manager not well liked at all by the fans, or certainly by the cross section of fans that are represented on social media, you would have to say. And then obviously the owner wants to sell the club. That's never been more evident, yet he seems to make a ham fist of it every time he tries. Obviously, it was the whole episode of giving away 10,000 half-season tickets before the COVID pandemic hit anyway. So there's already that sort of groundswell of people walking away from the club, at least in the short term. And part of my article that I wrote at the weekend was wondering whether the sort of the loosening of the ties, if you like, over the course of the lockdown might see even more fall by the wayside. So yeah, I think there's a real concern for the club here, and it's something that I don't really think they're that proactive or keen to address, because they don't seem to have any willingness to sort of reinvigorate that level of ambition that was there when Rafa was around. They seem to settle for their lot. 17th is good enough. I think we've come to see that over the course of this season. So yeah, I think there's genuine concerns. I mean, I sort of echo what you said, Dan. I've had a season ticket when I was younger, and obviously, I've lived away from the region for a while. But you always want to follow the team. But at some stage, enough will be enough, and fans will vote with their feet.
Chris, you wrote a similar article quite recently as well on a similar topic. So, what are your thoughts on the matter?
Yeah, I mean, it's disappointing to hear, Lee talking about his young son there, the fan saying, "What's the point?" And that's the reality check here for the club. I mean, I think the club are playing a real dangerous game here by the lack of ambition and the lack of want, to support Newcastle. I wrote in my piece that the access young kids have to football these days is incredible. They can watch any game they want. If they want to support Juventus, they can watch Juventus every other week if they want to, with the Barcelonas, the Real Madrid. And then domestically, as Lee pointed out, you've got City playing breathtaking football, Liverpool as well. FIFA Generation's a great phrase, Lee. They've got these ultimate teams, and they go on FIFA. Are they ever going to choose Ryan Fraser or Alan Maximan?
I did.
Well, you didn't. It's too late for you. You already invested. Right? I think we mentioned in the group chat, actually, Daniel, as well, that you still had the hope when you came in. There was still that hope that we would be good again. And I feel for the young fans. I know a lot of my friends have got young sons, daughters. My daughters couldn't care less. It's fortnight over Fraser as far as they're concerned. The monkeys. But I see them on Facebook with Harry Kane shirts and Salah shirts, and you see it slipping away. And I honestly don't think that this club at the minute has a care or a want or a need to engage with the next generation of fans. And you could see the death of the tsunami. Today's supporters might not be there tomorrow. It
is worrying. Yeah, I mean, you're right, Chris. When I got my season ticket, it was a season we finished 5th under Pardew, so there was still a little bit of optimism there. Obviously, Ashley had been at the club for a couple of years by that point, but then we had a Europa League campaign the next season, so it wasn't terrible, but it still wasn't obviously the heights that we've reached, say, in previous years. But yeah, I think that's what's kept me through it, to be fair. But at the same time, my dad's a massive influence. He's kept me through it as well. He's had his season ticket since the late 60s. So if I'd done anything else but apart from support Newcastle, I think I probably would have been crucified, to be honest.
I think given the way we've performed for the last 13 or 14 years, a lot of fans who kept the season tickets and kept buying match tickets have gone to the game purely out of habit.
Yeah.
In the same way as breaking any habit, it's really, really difficult. But what COVID's done, it's forcibly broken the habit for a lot of people.
Yeah.
I genuinely think it's forced people to break that habit. And I think a lot of people who were going sheerly out of habit, when we come out of lockdown, possibly later this year, I think they might find that they're not as inclined to just go out of habit anymore.
That was something that I touched on in the article as well, Lee. It's a great point because, ultimately, we're living in a generation now, particularly when sort of the younger generations, attention spans are short. Everything's in a 60-second clip or a 4-minute highlight block. Actually going to a game, you have to set aside, the 90 minutes. It's probably around a 3-4 hour window. That's, even if you're not going to a pub or whatever before and after, it's a big sort of time investment, and also the financial investment as well. Something else I touched on was, COVID's had a big impact on people's, take-home pay, jobs, furlough. So, and at the end of the day, if I'm trying to, cut my outgoings in my household, season ticket would be the first thing to go, because it's not actually enjoyable going to the game to watch us. At the end of the day, we play pretty dire football. I think let's call a spade a spade. So I honestly think there is a big storm brewing. I think what I did think was that, the positives, obviously, hanging on to this takeover. I sort of ignore any any rumours or press about the takeover now, because let's face it, it's been rumbling on for so long. But if there was a takeover, you would like to think that would inspire a whole new generation of fans with the level of optimism that could bring the potential investment in the team. And, just some of the things we talk around, people into the FIFA and the Ultimate Team. Like, when I was growing up, I was born in '89. When I was growing up, you had the likes of Shearer in the team. You had exciting players like a Laurent Robert, a Nobby Solano, people like that who you could really get excited about. You get, the shirt with a name on the back. Who would you really get now? Maybe Callum Wilson, maybe St. Maximin. But I suppose another point as well is that we're a bit of a stepping stone club. The club sell themselves as that sort of bridge between, into the Premier League and then onto a bigger Premier League club. So, do kids really have that time to build a sort of an affinity and a bond with players as well? So, yeah, there's a number of other things that are just sort of not directly linked to COVID, but they're just sort of all brewing up at the same time. And, it's going to be interesting to see what happens when, obviously, full stadiums are allowed.
On the subject of season tickets, the other thing I would raise is there's not going to be any need for a season ticket. The only reason I'll have my season ticket again next season, if they are available, is because I like the seats. We're really comfortable in the seats. The seats give us a great view and what have you. That's the only reason I would personally have that season ticket. You're not going to struggle to get a match-by-match ticket next season. It's not as if they're going to be selling like hotcakes. You will be able to get a ticket for any game you like next season without a shadow of doubt. So what's the justification of a season ticket other than if you like the seat you're sitting in on a week-to-week basis?
Craig makes a great point with the finance as well. That's perhaps something the club are completely letting go under the radar, really, that people are struggling. People have lost jobs, people have had to cut the cloth, and if you're consistently watching that dull, boring, miserable football, fighting relegation season after season with a manager you don't trust and you don't back, like Craig says, is the first thing you're going to cut.
Yeah. And I think just lastly for me on this, I think when Rafa went, I like I say, I was living out the region anyway, but even when I, used to come home to visit family, going to a home game would always be something I'd look forward to. A day on the sauce with mates or with family, it would always be something that I'd try and make sure that when I did come home, I'd almost plan the weekend around when we could go to St. James's. But when Rafa went, and I know a lot of people, I just stopped going. I don't want to put money in Ashley's pocket anymore. I didn't like the direction the club was going in. And, I love going to away games, don't get me wrong. I think they're brilliant. But, yeah, I suppose even before lockdown, I wasn't going to home games anymore just because of the direction the club was heading in. So I'm sure there's people like-minded, sort of similar to me, but with a season ticket, which is obviously a lot more important when it's just like, I suppose, sort of single ticket purchases like myself. But, it's going to be very interesting. And, I think I would like to see a takeover. Obviously, we all would, but I think hanging on for that to sort of resolve this issue is not going to work, and the club are going to have to give some serious thought to how they entice people back.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. Lady, do you want to say something there?
Yeah, we all know the club is good at putting serious thought to the future, aren't they?
Oh, yeah.
So what are their strong points?
Oh, very much so. Craig, just a little while ago, before you mentioned the fact that, back in the day, people would have had the likes of Solano, etc., on the back of their shirts, which brings us on to our next topic, which is the best foreign players to have played for Newcastle. Now, there are many names to choose from. You've got the likes of Ginola, Robert, Solano, just to name a few. Coming to you first, Chris, if you had to add to that list, or do you have any favourites, who would they be?
Well, like you said, it's a hell of a long list, isn't it? We've had some great foreign imports over the years. Maybe not so much now. Yeah, there's the odd couple like St. Maximin and Almiron have been pretty good. But for me, if I'm looking at the best foreign import in terms of what he did for the club and the way he played and the way he represented the club, I've got to go for Nobby Solano. What a player. 2 stints with the club, I think 39 goals or something. But the amount of goals he created was incredible, and the fact he plays the trumpet just makes him even cooler. There's not many footballers that do, There's a few Newcastle players playing the trombone, sadly, at the moment, isn't there? I think, for me, Nobby was just such a joy to watch, and he really cared for the club. I think he got it as well. He got it, he got the fans, and the amount of goals he created for Shearer, I'm sure Shearer would put him up there as well, to be honest. So.
Well, I think there was a recent interview just with Nobby Solano on Newcastle Fans TV, which I think he's been wanting to try and be a coach in Newcastle, but has been shunned a little bit by the club, which is it's shocking, really. And I think Shearer put put a retweet on it and said that he's a top bloke. So I'm fully with you on that, Chris. I think from my point of view, someone like Hart and Ben Arthur was a fantastic player, or Johan Kabay from that 11-12 season when we finished 5th, because that is probably my best memory supporting Newcastle that season. So for me, I remember Ben Arthur's goal against Bolton when he just basically tore through the middle of Bolton's defence like Moses part in the Red Sea. That's what it was like to me. And it was his ability on the ball was fantastic. Same with Kabay, unbelievable. Lee, coming to you on this. Any favourites for yourself?
There's a distinct difference for me between best and favourite. If we're talking about favourites, I mean, I've listed 2 as my favourite overseas imports. First one being Mirandina. Back in 1987 when we signed him, the very thought as a 14-year-old, what do you call it, scoreboard brother, that Newcastle had signed Brazil's number 9, and that's what he was at the time. Mirandina was Brazil's number 9, just was beyond my wildest dreams. And I just remember the whole fanfare, Brazil, black and white, half and half shirts. So the whole memories of Mirandina. He scored 23 goals in around about 65 games or something like that, so he didn't set the world on fire. But he wasn't poor. He wasn't poor. And the best thing I ever saw Mirandina do was kick Dave Besant up the arse after a cup quarter-final defeat against Wimbledon. And Dave Besant was literally chasing him around St James's Park trying to catch him at the final whistle. So I put him down as a favourite. Another favourite I've put down is Nobby Solano. Nobby Solano, for me, as you said, Chris, he just got Newcastle invested in the city. The fans took to him. And let's be honest, he had a wand of a right foot. He had an absolute wand of a right foot. I mean, he scored 38 goals, and I would expect that a good, probably 50% of those would have been from 20, 25-yard free kicks. He was. He wasn't the fastest, but he didn't need pace, because he could sort of drop his shoulder, whip a ball in, and Shearer invariably was on the end of it. I thought Solano was great, but the best foreign player I've ever seen play for Newcastle, I'll go with yourself, Dan, Hassan Ben Arfa. I think he's the most naturally talented footballer I've seen in a black and white kit after Gaza. I think the only thing that stopped Ben Arfa becoming one of the world's greats, one of the greatest in the world, was his attitude and his work rate. I watched Hassan Ben Arfa and thought to myself, you could be so much more than you are.
Bit like that, if anything, he could have been the best in the league as well.
Absolutely, but Hassan Ben Arfa just didn't have the mentality. He didn't have the work rate. He didn't have the mentality. The goals he scored, I mean, he's thunderbolt against Everton, his first goal, drop of the shoulder, bang, 30 yards. The goal in the FA Cup against, I think it was Blackburn. Blackburn. I mean, if that's Messi, that's replayed 100 times a week on Sky. And that goal against Bolton is still the best goal I've seen live at St James's.
Likewise.
As an individual goal. Yeah. And I've seen a lot of goals at St James's, believe me. But yeah, he's the best foreign player I've ever seen in a Newcastle kit.
There's certainly been sort of a French contingent we've had of good midfielders. Obviously, you mentioned Ben Arfa, Saint-Maximin at the moment, Laurent Robert and David Ginola. Craig, if you had to pick one of them right now, who would you pick?
Well, I was going to go on to talk about Robert, because he was certainly a personal favourite of mine, playing in that Bobby Robson team. Quite a thrilling team. I mean, before I go on to chat about Robert, it's nice to hear Lee talking around when signing a Brazilian number 9, 20 and 60 sounds like a decent return, as opposed to 3 and 60 as the current number 9.
I think we've had the first and the worst, haven't we? The first and the worst Brazilian, I think we've had.
Yeah, we could have had a whole section on it. But yeah, Laurent Robert was spectacular, wasn't he? I think he was. I think he hit the nail on the head, to be honest, Dan. We just seem to have this long trend of this sort of mercurial, enigmatic Frenchman down the left wing, and you reeled them off there. Robert was spectacular, wasn't he? When he was on form, he was absolutely unbelievable. And I think that sort of wand of a left foot that sort of Lee referred to, Nobby's right, you could apply the same to Robert's left, and it was just the left. The right was literally for standing up. I think that was purely what it was for. But I think, fond memories of the goals, that brace against Tottenham, 2 absolute screamers for goal of the season. I remember the one away to Liverpool as well. I think it might have been in the FA Cup. I think it was a dead ball free kick, but absolute rocket into the top corner. There was that sort of, I can't remember who it was against, but it was in that acrobatic sort of back heel where he seemed to hang in the air forever. It was sort of
Fulham.
yeah.
And
I think, just as part of that team, that Robson team was really, really special on its day. You had, sort of the youth of Dyer genius. You had the sort of the nous of speed. You obviously had Solano in there for a spell, and he was just absolutely perfect. And, Shearer's told a couple of stories recently. He used to scream at him to get the ball into the centre of the box quicker because he wanted to beat one person, two people, go back outside again. But, he was thrilling to watch. And I think another one, just lastly for me, is Fabrizio Colaccini. When he was brought in, I was a little bit, I suppose, only an hour about the signing. I think we got him from Deportivo. I was not really too sort of keen on it. I wasn't sure whether he'd adapt to the league, but he actually went on to have a fantastic career for us. Obviously, skippered us, and for most of the seasons he was with us, he was a key part of that team. Under Pardew when we finished 5th, and fond memories of Colaccini. I remember I was in the away end at Sellers Park for the Palace away game. Nothing major. I think it was a League Cup 3rd round. I think Dummett scored in extra time. We won 4-3. Yeah. It's quite close to the, I think, about 3 or 4 rows back at Sellers Park. And I remember they scored at our end, and the players just rushed over to the away ends. It's down the side at Sellers Park, and honestly, I could see the white of Colaccini's eyes just celebrating in front of us. He was going mental. It was fantastic to see. But he was a really sort of talented defender as well. He could do the defending part of the game, but he could also bring the ball out, could pick a pass. He was a really, really top class operator on his day. PFA Team of the Year in that 11-12 season, which sort of proves its own point really. But they're the two that I would pick out for me.
Yeah, Lauren Rivera was responsible for one of the funniest things I've ever seen at St James's Park. When the clearance, when he smacked Bernard in the face 5 yards.
It was like a Joshua
he was walking around like he'd had a bottle of Jack Daniels for about 3 seconds before he landed on his ass.
I thought you were going to mention when he stripped down to his kecks on his last ever game. I was like, is that what he's going to say? But there's a couple of funny moments there.
On the subject of Colaccini there, Craig, someone who was signed at the same time as him, who was a personal favourite of mine, is Jonas Gutierrez.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, we all know about his recovery from cancer and coming back to essentially save us from relegation in 14-15 with that goal against West Ham. But before that, he was actually quite a good player. I always thought he had ability on the ball. He could take it past a man. He could hit a shot from range. I mean, he was always my favourite, I think, because when I was younger, I used to like Spider-Man. So he suddenly just became this sort of idol to me. And I remember when I was, I think, 8 years old, it was 2 days before Christmas. I was in Phoenix with my dad, and I was going up the escalator, and suddenly I look up, and it's Jonas Gutierrez, and little 8-year-old me couldn't believe what he was seeing. And of course, I got a photo with him, which I still have, and he was lovely, very polite, and took some time, and just a great man. I think in general, not just a footballer, but I think just as a testament to what he's been through, just in general, I think a great man. I think also just as well, we mentioned Ginola before as well. At the same time as Ginola, we had Tino Asprilla. Now, how did he fit into this debate? I'm going to come to you on this, Chris.
Well, Tino, and I remember when we signed him that snowy day with his big fur coat on. And there's a funny story, isn't there, when Keegan signed him and the Parma president swore at him in Italian and Keegan was shaking his hand or something. He didn't know what he was saying because he was so angry at him. But I remember with Tino, I think it was his debut against Middlesbrough, that drag back and the cross. And you just thought, wow, this guy's arrived. But the madness of Tino, I think about 3 or 4 games later, he was playing really well. I think we won the game against Man City and he just nutted Keith Curle and got a red card out of nowhere. And you're thinking, this is the South American flair. I've got a funny story about Tino, actually, when years ago, when I used to work in nightclubs, there was a young doorman, he didn't know who he was, and he walked onto the Tuxedo Princess, and he had a few sauces in him, and he was swaggering around all over the place, and this guy went, "Oh, you get out," and he shoved him down the stairs. And the tuxedo princess and all of the Dover come run towards this young lad going, no. And Tino got up apparently and just high-fived him and walked back in the club. It was absolutely fine, really. But yeah, great memories in the Barcelona game, obviously.
Obviously, yeah, no, brilliant. And as I said, I'd just like to make a case for David Ginola. Now, he didn't actually score many goals for Newcastle. If you actually look at his stats, but I just think he started off this sort of line of mercurial Frenchmen that we've had, and
yeah,
in that mid-90s Entertainers team, just what a player. I mean, unfortunately, I wasn't alive to see it, but just a fantastic player.
You sort of associate him with that Entertainers team, and then also the 5-0 against Man U. You know, that sort of the way he turned Gary Neville top corner, and then there's that obviously that clip that gets replayed where he skips away from Neville, who goes from one side of the shot through to the other side just because he's that quick for him. But yeah, he was for the short time he was here, he was obviously massive for us, wasn't he? Just something very special.
Yeah, I think one of the most technically gifted goals I ever saw was that one against Ferencváros, wasn't it? But he flicked it up over the top of the guy's head, and just the beauty of it, you know, the strike, and I don't think any other player could have done that.
No, I think you're right on that, Chris. Moving on to our third topic of the night, which is discussing British football's best and worst exports. Now, if you think about best, you think about the likes of Gaza at Lazio, you think about Keegan at Hamburg, Gareth Bale going to Real Madrid, and possibly more recently, Jadon Sancho at Dortmund. Craig, would you like to comment on the ones maybe I've mentioned, or add to that list?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to start with Bale just in terms of the sheer amount of trophies he's won. And I think, you know, individually as well, he's scored on a lot of big occasions. He scored in 2 Champions League finals. He's won 4, which is, you know, unbelievable. He scored that memorable goal in the Copa del Rey final as well, where he seemed to do almost like 400-metre lap around the pitch, around the right back, and still got back on the pitch to slot the winner. You know, Real Madrid's we'll come on to sort of our favourite second teams in the last segment, but Real Madrid's a funny club. You know, it's very hard to sort of find favour with the fans there, even if you're a serial winner and you're part of teams that have won trophies year after year. You know, it's actually quite sad to see the way it looks to have ended for Bale at Madrid, because, you know, if you look at the service he's given the club in terms of the performances, the trophies, some of the quality of goal, he should be adored. You know, he should be absolutely put on a pedestal, and you know, they should be singing his praises. But as often happens with Madrid, you have your sort of time in the spotlight, and you seem to fall out of favour very quickly there. You know, the press get on your back. I think the whole you know, Wales Golf Madrid thing with the flag, you know, the fact he didn't really seem to embrace the language too much, and the culture counted against him. But I think for me, he has to be right up there in the conversation of the best ever. I think one other one, and I think it's a nice contrast, actually, is Steve McManaman, which probably doesn't really get thought about too much. You know, he joined Madrid on a Bosman free. He was one of the first big Bosman frees from Liverpool back in the late 90s. And, you know, he himself scored in the Champions League final, won 2 of those when he was with Madrid. And I suppose there's a slight contrast to Bill. He seems to have sort of maintained that love affair with the fans in Madrid. You know, he's a fluent Spanish speaker, seemed to really embrace the culture in the dressing room at Madrid at that time, which was obviously full of big hitters, you know, the likes of Hierro, Raúl, Casillas, you know, sort of really sort of strong characters in that team. He's another one who potentially gets overlooked sometimes when we sort of think about those big name exports. But he made the absolute most of that opportunity when he went to Madrid. I think there's no doubt about that. So those would be 2 I'd sort of think of. But I think any of the ones you mentioned, even if we go further back to the 80s, you know, Keegan, and even just going further back, the likes of John Charles, which is obviously long before all of our times. But yeah, there's been some great players sort of finding their way onto the continent.
Yeah. I think as well, you could even someone I didn't mention at the start would be Gary Lineker at Barcelona, who did very well at Barcelona. Lee, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, what you call it, Craig's just stolen my thunder, because all of the players we've talked about have been of an age where homesickness probably doesn't play as big a part in players trying to settle into a foreign culture, because they can hop on a flight very, very easily on a daily basis. Even they can talk to family and friends similar to the way we are now. So I've actually gone for the best British foreign export to be John Charles. John Charles joined Juventus from Leeds in 1957, back at a time when it was unheard of for British players to be playing in Spain or Italy or France. In 5 years, he won 3 Italian league titles, Scudettos. He won the Italian Cup twice, and he played 150 odd games, and he scored 110 goals. And all this is at a time when no British player had ever done anything like this. No British player had sort of gone to one of the bigger leagues in Europe and tested themselves. But as I say, going back to the point that he wasn't playing football in a time when, if he was a little bit homesick, he could jump on a flight back to the UK to spend time with his friends or his family. He couldn't jump on a Zoom call to chat with his friends and his family. So sort of acclimatised into a new culture back in 1957, when he was very much on his own, must have been really, really difficult. And to achieve what he achieved, when you read into it, I just thought it was incredible. And I think he was the forerunner, the trailblazer, if you like, for all of those names that Craig mentioned. Keegan going to Hamburg, it's a similar sort of story to the Maradona at Napoli story. Hamburg were a very, very mediocre German side when Keegan arrived. They hadn't finished 6th, apparently, in 10 years before Keegan arrived. And within 2 years of Keegan arriving, they won the Bundesliga. Keegan in his first season was actually banned for 8 games, believe it or not, for actually punching an opponent. But he still went on to win the European Footballer of the Year trophy twice, which effectively is today's Ballon d'Or. So to do that at an unfashionable team like Hamburg, and I think the likes of Charles and the likes of Keegan are, as I said, the forerunners and the trailblazers for your Beckhams, for your Gareth Bales and things along those lines. So those two, for me, are the pick.
Chris, if you had to maybe think of a worst British export, who would you go with?
Well, unfortunately, the player that comes to mind straight away is a player I used to love when he played for us, is Jonathan Woodgate. I think he had 3 years at Real Madrid, and he was an absolute disaster. Was it an own goal, a goal, and a red card? Poor Woodgate had an absolute stinker. The fact that we got 13 million quid for him was a bit of daylight robbery in a way to Real Madrid, but I think him definitely is going to be the worst British export. And I think Ashley Cole was very poor as well when he went to Roma. He made a massive deal, didn't he, as well, about players should go abroad and try other cultures. And then he was just dreadful for Roma. And he had that weird photograph where he was away from the team, and that had a meme, didn't it, online?
Became a meme.
Photos of Ashley. Sadly, 2 great players domestically in this country, brilliant players, but just didn't cut the mustard overseas. And I think we've all spoke about the good ones. Beckham, I mean, he's won everything. He won a league in France, league in Spain. He won trophies in America, and obviously Gareth Bale as well, as Craig rightly said. His record was 1 and 2 before it all fell away at Madrid. And I think any other club in the world, he's a hero of statue, not Madrid.
Yeah, I think what I'd like to mention is Michael Owen at Real Madrid. Because
how dare you mention his name?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, because the only reason I mentioned is because, of course, he signed for Newcastle from Madrid. Now, I heard a story about Michael Owen saying that at Madrid training he used to play 5-a-side, and a lot of the players there at the time, like Zidane's and all that, didn't actually rate him that highly, and he was good because of his pace and not really much more than that, to be honest. So I don't know what. Michael Owen's an interesting one, of course, for his own reasons. At Newcastle, he isn't exactly liked a lot. But Craig, what do you make of his time at Real Madrid?
He was a funny one at Madrid, because you look at his goals per game record and the opportunities he actually had. He was often coming off the bench in that team. He actually didn't have a bad record there. It wasn't by any stretch of the imagination a sort of a 1 in 2 like Bale, like Chris has mentioned. It was more like the sort of the 1 in 3 level. But he was. He was a little bit unfortunate over there, I would say. Even if I've absolutely no time for him now, but he was a little bit unfortunate over there, I have to say. It was almost like he wasn't a big enough signing to go over there. They were probably coming towards the end of that Galactico era, but he was more of a cheaper cut price type Galactico signing. He was probably starting to feel the effect of some of the injuries he'd had as well. I think the pace was dimming a little bit. He was having to sort of alter his game. He was probably a little bit unfortunate there. I think he was only there for maybe a season. But I suppose another one I'd throw into the mix in terms of potentially the worst would actually be sort of in that Ashley Cole mould that Chris was talking about. It was actually Joe Hart. He spelled it Torino. Obviously, was England's number one. You know, multiple major tournaments was our number one. Pep obviously came in, didn't fancy him at all. Brought in Claudio Bravo before he obviously got Edison and shipped Hart off to Torino. And by all accounts, he had a very poor time over there. I think he made a mistake on his debut, which cost them a defeat. Then kept a couple of clean sheets, but by the end of the season, he made a number of other mistakes. I think the chairman was publicly saying we didn't expect an England international keeper to make so many errors. So sort of signaled the end of Joe Hart really as a real force in the goalkeeping ranks. You know, he was undisputed number one for England for a number of years. I think people forget how much Joe Hart was impressive on his day. You know, he used to have some absolutely worldy games for Man City in the Champions League. I remember a game against Dortmund, I think it was, he made some absolute world-class saves. And, you know, I think the sort of perceived sense of that he's a little bit arrogant, maybe sort of people forget how good a keeper he was, but the season at Torino really sort of marked the end of him as a first-choice keeper, really. And obviously we've seen he's now back up at Tottenham after spells at Burnley as well. So, yeah, he'd be one to throw into the mix as maybe one of the worst, potentially.
I think with Joe Hart, I think his downfall began in the Iceland game at the Euros. I think that was a catalyst, because we all know the mistakes he made in that game, which led England to their most embarrassing defeat at a tournament for 60-odd years. Brings us on to our final topic for tonight, which is something that I've been looking forward to discussing this one, especially with you, Chris. Our final topic tonight is our favourite second teams. Now, of course, we're all Newcastle supporters here. I think that much is obvious. But I think everyone tends to have another team who they potentially have a soft spot for. Certainly with me, Gateshead being my local team, I always look out for, and I've done a bit of reporting for them, etc. And I also look out for Rangers, being for family reasons. Now, Chris, coming to you on this, because I'm pretty certain that your second team is Celtic, so I'm intrigued to have a little discussion about this.
Keep it friendly, boys. Keep it friendly, please.
Nothing but friendly this year, but it's interesting, Danny, because my family are split down the middle. It's a bit like the Montagues and the Capulets. My family, I've got half of them are Rangers and half of them are Celtic. My dad's Celtic, always has been, and there's always been a little banter between them. I remember growing up watching Old Firm derbies with my dad, and I've never seen as many emotions in one game in my life that I watched with my dad at the Old Firm derbies. And I was very lucky to watch Old Firm games with a Rangers side with Gascoigne and Laudrup and McCoist and those players, and then Celtic had the likes of Van Hooijdonks and your Di Canios, and then started to go into Henrik Larsson. But I love that rivalry. I think as a derby in world football, even though I'm a mad Newcastle fan, I actually think there's no better derby in the world than the Old Firm derby, personally. I really don't.
Yeah, no, I probably agree with you on that. I think the time is fantastic, but I think at times there's real hatred between some Rangers and Celtic supporters. Yeah, Lee, I think it looks like you wanted to chip in on this.
The Old Firm derby, there's a lot more than just football to it.
Oh yeah,
there's so many different facets to it, isn't it? And I would say probably in world football, the Old Firm derby is the most hostile. Because of everything surrounding it. It's far beyond football, isn't it? But coming on to second favourite teams, I don't have a second favourite team as such. But with you guys talking about Celtic and Rangers, it just makes me smile, because back again, when I first started standing in the Gallowgate on a Saturday, it wasn't long after a certain team from the far north of Scotland had turned over Bayern Munich and Real Madrid on the way to winning the Cup Winners' Cup. A chap called John Hewitt scored for Aberdeen in Gothenburg and had won the Cup Winners' Cup, beating the mighty Real Madrid. And back in the day, there used to be a bit of banter in the Gallowgate end between the Rangers contingent and the Celtic contingent. So you'd have the Rangers contingent going Rangers, Celtic contingent coming back with Celtic. And as a young nipper, I was always the one voice you heard in between them going, Aberdeen! Aberdeen! But it was just simply because I'd seen this Aberdeen team managed by Alex Ferguson, this unfashionable Aberdeen team, beaten Bayern Munich and Real Madrid. And for some reason, I've always since then had this sort of tendency on a Saturday to have a look for Aberdeen's results. I mean, they've not won anything since God was a boy. But yeah, just brought back some memories in the Gallowgate, being the lone dissenting voice, trying to get Aberdeen heard above the Celtic and Rangers fans.
That's a very interesting story, that, Lee. I like that. Craig, do you have a soft spot for any other teams?
Yeah, I used to live in Maidenhead down in Berkshire for a couple of years, and had a great time living there. It was sort of working not too far from there. They share a lot of similarities with Newcastle in a way. They're a non-league side, so they're currently in the conference. They were Conference South when I lived there, but they've got their ground, York Road's one of the oldest grounds in use in the UK, I think, potentially the oldest that's still in use. It's right in the middle of the town. It's got pubs all around it, so it's brilliant for a few jars before and after the game. It's a sort of an old school ground. It's got a terrace behind the goal. They play in black and white. They're nicknamed the Magpies. It's perfect, really. It's almost just like
You've not gone too far, Craig, have you?
No, exactly. Couldn't say I wasn't looking for something similar. I mean, to be fair, non-league football is about as good as we're playing at the moment. So, but yeah, no, really enjoyed that. You could grab a pint, stand behind the terrace. It was just real sort of proper non-league, sort of really enjoyable. Tenner in. Can't sort of recommend non-league football highly enough, particularly
real football, mate.
Yeah, exactly. And I think particularly now more than ever, non-league clubs are going to need our support when sort of they're allowed back as well, because we're coming from the first part of tonight's show where we discussed the future for Newcastle. I think non-league clubs will definitely need our support more than ever. So I'm going to make a concerted effort to go and support local non-league clubs once all this is over. So that's one. I suppose another couple just to touch on Cologne in Germany. I went to see them play RB Leipzig about 3 years ago, I think it was. Now, I actually did Cologne marathon on earlier in the day, so I ran the marathon and then went to watch Cologne Leipzig later that day. I had a beer in the stands, and I think we often hear that the German football model has a lot to sort of recommend it in terms of its advantages over the English model. The sort of 50+1 ownership rule, the cheap ticketing, the fact, just the fan experience. You can drink in the stands, and I couldn't agree with that more. There was Leipzig fans intermixing with Cologne fans side by side, no problems. But behind each goal, you had the sort of the hardcore, sort of ultra tight fans who were making a fantastic din and atmosphere. So that's another club I always look out for as well. Really enjoyed that. And then, I suppose, lastly, a little bit more sort of glory hunt is Real Madrid. I think that probably spans from my younger days watching sort of Champions League when it used to be on ITV, and they obviously had that galaxy of stars that were just ridiculous. Ronaldo, Figo, Zidane, Roberto Carlos, Raul. You just couldn't believe that a team made up of all of those stars could actually form a sort of a passable formation, and they just think they had too much attacking talent for their own good. But yeah, I mean, a game I really remember fondly was that game that Ronaldo scored a hat-trick at Old Trafford and got applauded off. I think it was to send them through to the semi-finals of the competition. He was just absolutely... He was carrying a little bit of weight, and he probably wasn't as electric as he was in his Barca and Inter Milan pomp, but he was unbelievable that night. Glorious hat-trick. And Real Madrid have always been the team that I followed as well.
Wasn't that the game they kind of decided to sign Beckham in? Didn't he get a couple of goals in that game, I think?
Yeah, he came off.
I think.
He dropped him for that game, and it was at the time where I think people had come to be aware that it was this sort of perceived rift between Beckham and Ferguson, and then he came off the bench, scored 2 against Madrid. And I think you're right, Chris. I think that probably rubber stamped his move.
Yeah, I think what you touched on before, though, Craig, with the whole non-league football and supporting that, I think that's really important, because I mentioned obviously I have a soft spot for Gateshead being my local side, and I remember going to Wembley with Gateshead in 2014 in the conference playoffs, and I mean, unfortunately they didn't win. Cambridge were victors that day. Now Gateshead are in the National League North, so the division below, and I just think these clubs, they're the beating heart of football in this country, and I think they will need our support, and when football returns, because let's be honest, as much as we love going to Newcastle and all that, clubs like that will be fine, I think financially, but clubs like your Gateshead, your Blythe Spartans, your not Hartlepool, Spennymoor Town, they need our support, and I would encourage everyone to please do support them.
It's like Craig said, Daniel. Sorry, it's like Craig said at the start as well. One of the things that Newcastle might lose with the fans, with the financial implications, and obviously the way people are feeling, they might go non-league. They might say, "I've had enough of this."
It's a very good point.
This disconnect from me as a fan, and go back to my roots and watch real football. So,
yeah, no, it's a very good point. Certainly, I've loved watching Gateshead. I've done a bit of report for them recently as well. Well, not for them, but sort of on them. But it's a fantastic place to go and watch a game of football, and they have a really good core of fans at Gateshead. Blythe Spartans, I'm sure, is exactly the same, even though Gateshead and Blythe don't exactly get on too well because there's a bit of a rivalry there. But yeah, and obviously, as I mentioned at the start, I have a soft spot for Rangers just with family reasons. But it's interesting that, you know, with all of us being Newcastle supporters, that we have these little soft spots for other teams. I think that's really interesting in terms of football. And unfortunately, I think that brings us to the end of our chat tonight. We've had some great discussion. Thank you, lads, for being on once again.
No problem.
Please, Daniel.
Thank you all very much. Just a reminder, as I mentioned at the start, if you do want to be part of True Faith, head to the Twitter at TFNUFC and get in touch. So that just leaves me to say thank you all very much for watching and goodbye.
Cheers, guys.
thanks, guys.